The wind howled across the jagged cliffs of Viridian 3, a barren world caught between the frontiers of war and diplomacy. Sergeant Daniel Briggs lay motionless atop a rocky outcrop, his breathing slow, measured. The scope of his modified M55 Gauss sniper rifle was trained on a distant outpost nestled in the valley below, a cluster of alien structures, guarded by sentries with plasma carbines slung across their insectoid frames. Briggs adjusted his scope, tracking his target. Warlord HFY, a high-ranking arms dealer responsible for supplying anti-human factions across the sector. The mission was simple: one shot, one kill, exfiltration before anyone knew what had happened. Standard procedure. Through the digital overlay, he counted 13 hostiles in his immediate line of sight. 3 stationed at the gate, 2 on the eastern watchtower, the others patrolling in staggered rotations. HFY himself stood in the center of the compound, barking orders in a guttural, clicking language Briggs didn't understand. It didn't matter. The moment he had a clear shot, it was over. Briggs exhaled slowly, aligning the crosshairs with HFY's elongated skull. The wind speed, gravitational pull, atmospheric density, all accounted for in seconds. His finger tightened on the trigger. A flicker of motion. Briggs barely had time to process the anomaly before a pulse of blue energy erupted from the air behind him. Instinct took over. He rolled to the side just as a crackling net of plasma strands slammed into the rock where he had been lying. He landed in a crouch, rifle snapping up. Too late. Figures in sleek obsidian armor emerged from the shadows, their weapons humming with lethal intent. Galactic Council enforcers. A dozen of them. Silent. Efficient. Their appearance answered a question he hadn't even thought to ask. Who else wanted HFY dead? The leader stepped forward, a towering alien clad in a deep crimson variant of the armor. His voice, amplified through a translator, was a cold, metallic growl. Human operative. You are under arrest for war crimes against the Dominion. Briggs didn't hesitate. He fired. The rifle's discharge sent a hypersonic round straight into the enforcer's helmet. The alien's head snapped back with a sickening crunch, but the others barely flinched. Within a fraction of a second energy net was deployed. This time, it struck. Briggs felt an agonizing surge of electricity course through his body. His muscles seized, vision flickering. He tried to resist, but his limbs refused to obey. The rifle fell from his hands, clattering uselessly against the rocks. He hit the ground. Hard. Darkness surged at the edges of his vision, but he fought it, gritting his teeth against the pain. He wasn't going down like this. Not without taking a few more of them with him. His hand twitched toward the combat knife strapped to his thigh, but a boot slammed into his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was the sky above Viridian 3, littered with the distant glimmers of warships. Damn it. Briggs woke to the feeling of cold steel against his wrists. He was strapped to a restraining platform, energy cuffs locked tight around his arms and legs. His head pounded, a dull reminder that the Council's tech wasn't just meant to subdue, it was meant to break. He glanced around. The room was sterile, metallic, humming with an unfamiliar alien energy. He wasn't on Viridian 3 anymore. The door slid open with a sharp hiss. A figure strode in, draped in ceremonial robes that marked him as a council arbitrator. His angular face was unreadable, twin sets of black eyes studying Briggs like he was some sort of dangerous specimen. The arbitrator's voice was smooth, calculated. Daniel Briggs, Sergeant of the Terran Military, Operative of the United Earth Special Forces. He paused. You are charged with the unauthorized execution of an alien national, violations of interstellar sovereignty, and acts of terrorism against the Galactic Dominion. Briggs smirked despite the splitting pain in his skull. I take it that means you're not sending me home. The arbitrator's expression didn't change. You misunderstand your position, human. The Galactic Council does not negotiate with war criminals. Briggs' jaw clenched. You really think I'm a war criminal? He let out a dry chuckle. You have no idea who you just grabbed. The arbitrator tilted his head slightly, as if considering the statement. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he activated a display screen. It flickered to life, showing a compiled dossier of Briggs' military record. Confirmed kills. Successful operations. High-value targets eliminated with uncanny precision. The list stretched on, longer than the arbitrator had likely expected. A shadow of doubt passed across the alien's features. Briggs leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, his voice lowering to something lethal. You think you've captured some low-level soldier. Some disposable operative. His eyes locked onto the arbitrator's. You just took an American sniper. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, the arbitrator's composure faltered. Only slightly. But Briggs saw it. You're making a mistake, Briggs continued, voice steady. Because when my people come looking, and they will come looking, you're going to wish you had killed me where I stood. The arbitrator recovered quickly, but there was an edge of hesitation now. He turned, his robes billowing slightly as he strode toward the door. You overestimate your importance, Sergeant. His voice was colder now, dismissive. Your people are insignificant in the grander scheme of the galaxy. The door hissed open. 2 heavily armed guards entered, their weapons trained on Briggs. You will be transported to Alicia Prime, where you will stand trial before the full council. The arbitrator's tone was final. There is no escape. No reinforcements. No warship coming to your rescue. Briggs simply smiled. We'll see. As the guards approached, gripping his arms with unnecessary force, he barely resisted. Let them think he was beaten. Let them believe they had him under control. Because Briggs already knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't staying in this cell for long. The cold, artificial light of the prison block flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows along the metallic walls. Sergeant Daniel Briggs sat motionless on the edge of the slab that passed for a bed, his wrists resting on his knees, his fingers subtly tracing the outline of the energy cuffs that bound him. The Galactic Council had thrown him into Alicia Prime's maximum security detention center, a facility designed to break the worst criminals in the sector. He was the only human in the entire complex. The cell across from him contained a Zolothian brute, a reptilian warrior covered in thick, scarred scales, his amber eyes locked on Briggs with unfiltered malice. To his left, a Daskarian assassin, slender and wrapped in tattered robes, methodically sharpened a curved blade against the edge of his cot, the rhythmic scraping filling the stale air. They all knew what he was, a human. An isolated target. The council had done more than imprison him. They had made him a spectacle, a test of endurance against those who hated humanity with a vengeance. The guards had barely left before the first threat came. You don't belong here, Terran, the Zolothian rasped, stepping forward until his claws curled around the energy barrier separating them. His lips peeled back in what might have been a grin. We eat your kind in the war camps. Briggs tilted his head slightly, meeting the alien's gaze with the same measured patience he used when lining up a 1,000-yard shot. He let the silence drag just long enough to make the Zolothian uncomfortable. You gonna talk all night, he said evenly, or are you planning to do something about it? A deep, rumbling growl vibrated through the air, but before the alien could respond, the barrier between their cells deactivated. Briggs barely had time to process the shift before the Zolothian lunged. The reptilian was fast, faster than anything that size had a right to be, but Briggs was already moving. He twisted away, dodging the first strike, then used the momentum of the Zolothian's own charge to pivot behind him. A quick, precise elbow to the base of the alien's skull sent the brute stumbling forward. The fight should have ended there. But the council hadn't just put him in this prison. They had set him up. A second alien surged from the side, a towering creature with 4 arms and flesh like hardened obsidian. Briggs barely dodged the first swing, ducking low as a jagged fist grazed his shoulder, sending a sharp jolt of pain down his arm. He countered with a swift kick to the knee joint, forcing the alien to stagger, but the attack was already coming from the other side. Briggs reacted on instinct. He dropped low, grabbed the fallen Zolothian by the throat, and used his massive frame as a shield just as the assassin's blade came down. A guttural hiss escaped the reptilian's throat as the curved dagger plunged deep into his chest. Briggs didn't hesitate. He ripped the knife free and spun, driving the blade straight into the Daskarian's side, twisting deep before yanking it back out. The assassin crumpled, a wet, gurgling noise escaping his lips before his body hit the floor. Silence followed. Briggs exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance as the Zolothian let out a final, rattling breath. He stepped back, surveying the bodies sprawled at his feet. The entire fight had lasted less than 15 seconds. He looked up. Every prisoner in the block had gathered at their barriers, their eyes fixed on him. Some held expressions of amusement, others calculated interest, a few whispered among themselves. The human was still standing. A voice broke through the stillness. "Well, that was entertaining." Briggs turned, muscles tensed, as a tall, hooded figure approached from the far end of the block. Unlike the others, this one moved with practiced precision, each step silent, deliberate. The hood slipped back just enough to reveal sharp, angular features, eyes like molten gold. "You've already made quite the impression, Sniper," the figure mused, arms folding across their chest. "Most humans wouldn't have survived the first hit." Briggs kept his expression neutral. "You don't look like the welcoming committee." The figure chuckled. "Nix vor," they said, offering no further explanation. "You've been here for less than a day, and already, you've managed to kill 2 of the biggest troublemakers in this block. You're either very skilled, very stupid, or very lucky." Briggs wiped the blood from his hands onto his prison-issued trousers. "I don't believe in luck." Nix vor smiled. It wasn't reassuring. "Then maybe you'll live long enough to make it out of here." Briggs narrowed his eyes. There was something calculated in their tone, something that suggested they knew more than they were letting on. "Let me guess," he said, voice steady. "You've got a plan." Nix vor leaned against the wall, observing him with something between curiosity and amusement. "I do," they admitted. "But the real question, Sniper," they tilted their head, golden eyes flashing, "is whether or not you're worth the risk." Briggs held their gaze, the weight of the moment settling between them. He had already made his choice the second the council had thrown him in here. He wasn't staying. "I guess you'll find out." For the first time, Nix vor's smile seemed genuine. "Good answer." Briggs moved through the prison's dim corridors with measured steps, his gaze sweeping over every detail, the rusted security panels, the flickering surveillance orbs, the uneven distribution of the guards. He wasn't just walking. He was mapping. Every weakness, every potential exploit. Alicia Prime might have been designed to hold the worst criminals in the galaxy, but it wasn't built to contain someone like him. Nix vor walked beside him, their posture relaxed but their eyes constantly shifting, analyzing just as much as he was. They had spent the last several hours exchanging knowledge, testing each other's instincts, their understanding of this place, its routines, its vulnerabilities. The assassin was sharp, unpredictable. But Briggs had learned to read them, the way they studied him, the way their smirks never quite reached their eyes. Nix vor might have been an ally for now, but trust? That was earned. "The guards are complacent," Nix murmured, barely moving their lips. "They think their stasis fields and automated sentries make them untouchable. That arrogance is our advantage." Briggs nodded, keeping his pace steady. He had already come to the same conclusion. The security teams rotated every 6 hours, but the outer perimeter was manned by drones, not living personnel. That meant the human error factor was concentrated within the walls. All they needed was the right moment of distraction. "Supply deliveries come through the lower docks," Nix continued. "Small crew, minimal oversight. That's our way out." Briggs glanced at them. "You've tried before." Nix's smirk was sharp. "Got farther than anyone else. But I was alone." They turned a corner, stepping into the prison's open yard, a massive, enclosed arena where inmates gathered under the watchful eyes of turrets mounted along the walls. The air was thick with the acrid scent of sweat and desperation. Groups of prisoners clustered together, alliances formed from necessity rather than loyalty. Eyes followed them. Some held curiosity, others thinly veiled hostility. Nix kept walking. Briggs did the same. Weakness in a place like this was a death sentence. As they passed a group of heavily scarred Borzaki enforcers, Briggs caught a murmur. "Human filth. Dead soon." His lips barely twitched. He had heard worse. They reached the far end of the yard, where a set of maintenance tunnels led toward the prison's lower sectors. Nix leaned against the bulkhead, voice low. "I've secured a passcode to the sublevel gates," they said. "That gets us past the first checkpoint. The real problem is the containment field. Once it goes down, every guard in this place will know." Briggs studied the ceiling-mounted turrets. The moment that field was breached, hell would break loose. "We need another variable," he said, thinking aloud. "A secondary event. Something big enough to split their focus." Nix raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting a riot." Briggs met their gaze. "I'm suggesting we give this place something else to worry about." A chuckle. Nix shook their head. "Dangerous. Reckless." Their golden eyes gleamed. "I like it." A distant klaxon sounded, signaling the next rotation. They had little time left before the full lockdown cycle began. Briggs turned toward the largest gathering of inmates. The syndicates, the gangs, the ones with the most to gain from disorder. He didn't need them all. He just needed one spark. He approached the Zolothian brute he had fought earlier, the one who had underestimated him. The alien's wounded pride was still fresh, evident in the way he tensed when Briggs stopped in front of him. "You want payback?" Briggs asked, his voice even. The Zolothian's claws flexed. "You mock me, human?" Briggs tilted his head slightly. "No. I'm giving you an opportunity." He nodded toward the guards stationed along the high platforms. "We're getting out. But first, we're breaking this place wide open." The reptilian's eyes flickered with interest. Not trust. Not yet. But incentive was stronger than loyalty in places like this. "If you're lying," the alien growled, "I will tear your throat out." Briggs smiled faintly. "Get in line." The plan was coming together. One more piece. Nix Vor, watching the exchange with mild amusement, pushed off the wall. "So what now, sniper?" Briggs adjusted his stance, eyes scanning the automated sentry points, the alarm triggers, the weak spots in their armor. "Now," he said, voice calm, "we start a war." The riot started with a single blow. Briggs watched as the Zolothian brute drove a clawed fist into the gut of a Borzaki enforcer, sending the towering alien sprawling across the prison yard. The stunned silence that followed was brief, electric. Then, like a match to dry tinder, chaos erupted. The yard exploded into violence. Prisoners surged forward, settling old grudges with fists, claws, and makeshift weapons. A Duskarian assassin vanished into the melee, reappearing behind a rival with a knife pressed against their throat. A massive crawl war beast lifted a guard over its head and snapped his spine like dry bark. Briggs didn't waste time watching. The riot was the distraction, but the escape was the mission. Nix Vor moved beside him, slipping through the chaos like a shadow. The stolen passcode disk clutched in their grip would get them through the first checkpoint. The Zolothian and his bruised ego had bought them a battlefield, but the real test was still ahead. A shrill alarm blared through the facility as automated turrets descended from the ceiling, spitting streams of plasma into the fray. Prisoners scattered, some dropping instantly, their bodies charred husks before they hit the ground. Others pressed forward, fueled by rage and desperation, overwhelming guards and ripping weapons from their hands. Briggs ducked behind a storage crate, pressing his back against the cold metal. He counted the rhythm of the turret fire 4 seconds between bursts, 2-second reload cycle. That was their opening. Nix Vor was already ahead of him, moving before the next volley fired. They slid beneath the line of plasma fire, coming up behind a fallen guard, ripping the security key from his belt. Briggs followed, keeping low, his pulse steady. Momentum was everything now. They reached the checkpoint, a reinforced blast door leading to the sublevel tunnels. The control panel glowed red, locked tight, but Nix slammed the passcode disk into the override port. The screen blinked. Access granted. The door hissed open. No turning back now. They slipped inside just as a squad of council enforcers stormed the yard, their heavy boots pounding against the steel floor. Briggs caught a glimpse of stun batons crackling, rifles swinging into position. The riot had done its job. But they weren't out yet. The tunnels stretched before them, dimly lit and lined with power conduits humming with energy. The scent of ozone thickened the air. These corridors weren't meant for prisoners. They were maintenance routes, unseen by guards, unprotected by sentries. Briggs kept his pace controlled, resisting the urge to run. Running got you killed. Running made noise. Nix glanced back at him, voice just above a whisper. We hit the lower docks in 5 minutes, assuming we don't trigger any automated defenses. Briggs adjusted his grip on the stolen guard rifle slung over his shoulder. Then let's not trigger anything. They moved quickly, navigating turns, checking corners before crossing exposed intersections. Every second was measured. Every footstep accounted for. Then the corridor lights flashed from dim orange to harsh red. A warning klaxon screamed to life. Briggs cursed. They found the bodies. Nix's expression tightened, their usual smirk absent. No time. We push forward. They turned the last corner, and almost ran straight into a council enforcer unit. The lead soldier, a hulking, six-eyed alien in high-grade armor, raised his plasma rifle. Briggs moved first. The stolen rifle barked in his hands, sending a hypervelocity slug straight through the enforcer's visor. The alien's head snapped back, body crumpling before it could fire. Nix was a blur beside him, their blade flashing once, twice, cutting down the next two before their weapons could be raised. The final soldier managed a shot, a crackling bolt of plasma that seared past Briggs' shoulder, singing his skin, before Briggs put 2 rounds through his chest. The silence afterward was deafening. Briggs exhaled, rolling his shoulder against the pain. Burn wound. Superficial. He'd had worse. Nix wiped their blade clean against the fallen enforcer's armor. We need to move. Now. They sprinted the final stretch to the dock doors, where a cargo shuttle was already prepped for launch. Briggs scanned the ship's markings, a freighter registered to a neutral faction. Not a warship, but it would do. Nix hacked the entry console, and the hatch hissed open. They climbed aboard, sealing the door behind them just as a fresh wave of alarms blared through the facility. Briggs moved to the cockpit, scanning the controls. Primitive compared to Terran craft, but familiar enough. Nix took the co-pilot seat, fingers already dancing over the navigation panel. They'll have fighter drones on us the second we break orbit. Briggs flicked switches, feeling the thrum of the engines roaring to life beneath them. He allowed himself the faintest grin. Then let's make this interesting. The docking clamps released. The shuttle lurched upward. And just like that, they were free.